your captain once again. My name is Christopher A. Bell Sr., and of course I'll be serving as your tour guide today. Now, as you can see from the location that we're in, that there's some differences that appear. And I want you to know this is exactly the way it was when Conan first began to find himself doing things that were contrary to what I thought he should do. It was just unexpected, just like we've arrived here, and I'm certain that this is a place that's been not necessarily planned in your thinking because of where we've done most of our lessons thus far. But once I've come to realize that trouble shows up in the most unexpected places, that I thought it would be a good idea as we prepare to go on our next tour of the location where we are, that we would just simply spend some time here and looking at this serene location and thinking about how calm and comfortable things may appear, but lurking underneath could be trouble. So we need to always be on the alert, and of course that's exactly what needed to happen in my experience. Because as I've explained to you in the past, Conan, you know, he was an ideal child. He did exactly what he was supposed to do. He didn't cry when he teethed, and I mean, whenever you went to get his attention, he would reach his little arms up and he'd want to hug you, and you would know that this was an ideal child that was going to grow to become what you thought he should be. Just as this scenery looks as if it's ideal. It's exactly what you would need to just enjoy yourself and relax, and this I do want you to do. But I want you to keep in mind that trouble lurks under the guise of comfortability. You need to recognize clearly that the first signs of trouble must be paid attention to if in fact you're going to be successful in dealing with it as it comes. So that's the island that we've arrived at. And so I want to spend some time today just talking to you, just alerting you to the idea that things don't always look or remain the way that they seem. Things change, and they don't necessarily change instantly. They usually change over time. But unfortunately, we're not paying attention to the changes that are going on around us. As a matter of fact, if you ever found anybody doing anything wrong and you caught them and you said something to them, I dare say that's probably not the first time that they committed what they're doing and you've seen at this point. But what happens is we just don't look carefully enough, nor do we pay attention, and so we miss the opportunity to recognize change as it comes. So we want to walk our way through today. Just an idea and an understanding of what it means to walk into the circumstances of the first signs of trouble and to deal with it in a way that will enable you to accomplish the objectives that you can. Now let's go and just consider the review and the things that we need to remind you. Remember now, we're governing our trip and all the things that we're doing around the gauges in a cockpit, gauges on an aircraft. Looking at that control panel, we learned a little something about that the last time we spoke to one another. You understood to a great degree what that whole concept was all about and how that those gauges had to be depended upon and not necessarily what you saw or what you feel. And we, I think, had a better understanding of how that whole concept works. So I need you to be thinking about that because those gauges are very important and they'll play a major role in what it is that we're going to do along our trip. Now, another thing you have to be reminded of is this concept of emotional intelligence. I know you've heard the term, we've mentioned it earlier, but I just need to remind you that this concept that we're looking at is just a little different. It's not about responding to circumstances the right way. It's about taking your emotions into the circumstances and controlling the results of those circumstances. Now keep also clear, we can't control circumstances, but the outcome we can. We can do what we need to do within our thinking that will give us a completely different perspective and enable us to function the way that I think we should. So as we approach this location today, I want you to just understand clearly that there's some insight that you need to gain. There's some things that I think you can accomplish in your thinking as you just simply relax and realize before we go into our tour today, we just want to spend a moment or two right here listening to and looking at the scenery and recognizing how comfortable it can be. But if you lose sight of the things that are going on around you, you can find yourself under the control of an emotion that you had no intention of expressing, but it crept in without your knowledge. I dare say there's some of you in the crowd, some of you that are in this experience that we're doing now, those that are on this plane, that some thoughts are going through your mind that are completely contrary to what we're doing. That's how the mind works. It doesn't keep its focus long to do much of anything. I mean, the attention span is very short. And so I need you to know that you have to take control of the way you think, take control of the way you feel. And the only way you're going to do it, of course, is to govern your life after the design of that control panel. You need to know what thoughts to bring, what feelings to express, and to do it at a time when it's needed because you've already thought it through before the circumstances develop. So then there's what I like to think of, as these negative emotions come. And now we're thinking about first signs of trouble now. So we want to consider then when you begin to experience the first signs of discomfort. Let's consider. Now we're looking at, of course, the ability to navigate through grief and disillusionment. We understand that. We understand we're trying to just bring to the surface the idea that having lost a child is a very traumatic experience. So what is it that you do when these emotions come, since we know they're coming? When loss is experienced, there's just some things that happen automatically. So how can we utilize those feelings and put them in a position where they can benefit us and not be a problem to us? Well, I want to share a few verses with you, and I want you to just think very carefully with me. I'm going to read for you Isaiah chapter 61 and verses 1 through 3. Listen carefully. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, and to provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. Now, what I like to call that is simply God's replacement therapy. See, what you need to recognize about the way these verses read, that the Lord makes it clear that he provides comfort to those who mourn, he provides beauty for those who are in ash, and he gives joy to those who are mourning. Now, the only way you can experience joy is that you've got to be in a state of mourning first. So you've got to understand, if it's going to be replaced, the initial emotion has to come to the surface. So if you're mourning, then that's an indication that comfort is what you actually need. But only one can operate at the same time, and so we know the negatives are coming. And so what we need to do is counteract those negatives by recognizing that their appearance is an indication that God is replacing it. So when I'm in a state of mourning, I know then that that's a sign that God is about to bring comfort. If I'm in a state of grieving, I know that that's a time that God is about to bring about praise. See, God has to do what is necessary to bring us to the point where we think according to the standard that he set. So, of course, then the only way you can experience a positive emotion is to recognize the contrary, which is a negative. And so when that negative emotion occurs, the way you handle that, according to the concept that we're explaining to you today, is you recognize it as a signal that God is in the process of working through what's to come next. So where there's mourning, there'll be comfort. Where there's despair, there'll be gladness. But those negatives come first, and then we know what's going to follow shortly thereafter. So you've got to begin to think of negative emotions as part of God's replacement therapy. When you feel those things, you don't react to them. You reflect upon what they are and realize that what's going on now, you're being alerted to the fact that there's a change coming. So you can rest assured that the change is going to be imminent, and God is going to do his part. But what you've got to do, you've got to be willing to give the necessary attention to what you're feeling. See, we are too quick to act on what we feel. When people do things to us, when people cause things to happen to us, I mean, whatever feeling comes, that emotion follows, and then we react to it. But this control panel is going to give us the ability to pause and to think. Now, we've looked at a video. You've seen that video. You've seen what happened to that pilot when he lost control, when he started operating according to the way he felt, when he took his attention away from those gauges, and when he no longer depended upon that control panel. He found himself in the soup. He didn't know what to do. He panicked. And you know the end result was a catastrophe. But that doesn't need to happen to you. The loss has been significant. The pain is indeed evident, but you don't need to allow that to control your life. Think it through, feel it, and allow God to bring to your attention what he's trying to replace it with, and let him do his work. We're talking about, again, replacement therapy. The fact that God is in the process of showing us that we can respond to things differently, and we can look at life from a different perspective. As a matter of fact, the Apostle Paul in the scriptures, he declares that death need not be victorious. He says, "Oh, death, where is your sting? Oh, grave, where is your victory?" he says. So what he's saying in essence is that you don't have to look at death the way it's been viewed in the past. It's lost its validity, it's lost its power once you begin to recognize that your perspective has changed in regards to what God has done. I mean, you got to understand life. I mean, if you've been around for any length of time, you know things come and things go. This system that we live in, known as the world, is symmetrically designed in such a way that things come and they go. And so we understand that death is a part of life, but our response to it is very important. We don't want it to cause us to be overwhelmed. We don't want it to take us into areas that we don't want to be. We want to be able to function in a manner that enables us to gain and benefit from what it is that happens to us. Now here I sit again as an example. I'm not here as an expert trying to tell you what you need to do without any experience in what I'm saying at all. You need to know that the things that occurred in my life were traumatic. The things that occurred were extremely difficult. But what was the significance of it all was the fact that I was willing to pause and think about it and see if, in fact, there's any value in it. Because God doesn't do anything haphazardly. Nothing ends prematurely. I mean, God knows exactly what needs to take place. He knows exactly when it's supposed to happen and what the results of that occurrence should be. And so what we find today, now here I sit, sharing with you a thought or two about what I think God has made clear to me through the experience that I had. Now, that's not the way you look at death. People are trying to get over it. People are trying to get out of it as quickly as they can. People are still grieving and trying to, understand why that thing continues to persist in their lives. Well, I'm submitting to you today that what you need to do is to recognize God's replacement therapy system and then realize that maybe there's some benefits to be gleaned from this thing that I'm undergoing, and I've been looking at it from such a negative perspective that I can't get the benefits that come with it. Now, those negative feelings that you have, of course, we realize are designed to bring about change in your thinking so that you will realize at some point in time that you have the ability to walk through and to work through those things that you may be undergoing in the way of experiences, because you know now, if you're following our line of thinking clearly, that those negative emotions are simply signals of new emotions that are attempting to replace them. But God cannot do it until you embrace that way of thinking. So it's all about faith. Remember now, our journey. Now we're on the third leg of this journey. Our journey is headed towards faith. That's our ultimate objective. We've got to go through some differences and difficulties to get to faith. Faith is not something that comes cheaply. Faith cost the Lord Jesus his life. In order for us to live according to the principles surrounding faith, that we've got to recognize when we arrive at a stop, such as the place where we are today, first signs of trouble, we need to recognize then that this is necessary for us to progress to the next level of where we need to go. So the sooner you begin the process, the sooner you begin to think it through, the sooner you begin to reflect upon it, the better off you'll be. Now, I have no way of knowing how long you've been exposed to the situation that you're in. I don't know exactly how long you may have been undergoing the feelings that you've been experiencing. But what I do know is that if you take consideration and take seriously this idea and concept of this control panel and this emotion detector gauge and start thinking about what God could possibly do, then I believe that you could experience some things that you just would not be able to understand. Now, have you ever thought about some major challenge that somebody faced and they overcame it and you questioned in your own mind, now how did they do that? If that would have been me, I would have never been able to do it. As a matter of fact, ain't nowhere in the world I could undergo that. My prayer is that that stuff never happens to me so I don't have to worry about it. Well, I want you to know, the reason people are able to is because they stop and think about it. They recognize that there's greater value in what they're experiencing and that there's a much bigger picture than themselves. See, there's much more to life than me. I mean, there's some things I'd like to see happen in life, but I think the greatest impact is to influence others to avoid the complications that I may have experienced. And if I do that, if I've succeeded in that, then my life has been lived according to God's plan and it's not been in vain. Did you know you have a purpose in life? And that purpose will have to be lived out. And the condition that you will, experience during the course of your development in this process, then you will be able to accomplish what I think you need to in order to achieve the objectives that you want. Now, back to Conan. Now, Conan, again, as I mentioned, he was very affectionate. He really craved and needed affection. And again, it was something that's really pleasurable for a parent to see. I mean, for you to have a child that reaches his arms and attempts to embrace you at 10 months old, reminding you that's how old he was when this thing started. At 10 months old, he's reaching, he's trying to, express his emotions. He's trying to, receive some affection. Now, that's delightful. But the unfortunate thing about it was that desire didn't stop as he grew. See, the older he got, the more demanding he got concerning what he felt he needed and deserved. So now it was no longer cute for him to raise his arms and reach for me, but now it had turned into attention-getting techniques to get my attention, to assist him, because whatever kind of affection he would receive was all right with him. No longer did he need positive affection. He just wanted a reaction. And so now I find myself faced with something that's completely different. But now, just as this location that we're in doesn't give any clear indication of there being any problems, but at the same time, I never had a clue that that could have been, and I found out later that it was, the first sign of trouble. The first sign of trouble was the idea that he thought he could receive affection when he wanted it, and he would demand it whenever he decided he needed it. Now, I had no idea, had no clue that that could have been associated with what would ultimately it would become. But now, I have the benefit of looking back and seeing now that with that kind of thinking, with those kind of subtle signals that are being revealed to us are not seen clearly because we are not looking in the right places. We find this even in the light of the animal world. You can find that when things are just going the way you think they should, then there's always indication that something's not right. If you look carefully enough, you'll see even in this light of all these birds, there's one with a broken wing. So there's always one situation, some circumstance that you can overlook if you don't pay attention, because everything looks normal. It looks the same. They play like other kids. They act like the other kids. But if you look carefully, you can see that even they can have broken wing. And it could come in the form of an emotion that just surfaces, and it comes at a time when you're not expecting it, and it comes in a place that's unexpected as well. So my encouragement to you is to enjoy life and to enjoy the family, but to remember that certain things are not necessarily what they appear to be. Now, you need to know this as well, that this is a very tricky point that I'm talking about, because childhood things you grow out of. I mean, children have diseases and they have complications, and as a parent, you worry about those things. You're really concerned. I mean, look, my daughter has this, they have a fever, they have that, and you think it's all but over. Man, I can't stand the idea that my child is sick, and then at some point in time, they can grow out of that. So they do grow out of circumstances, and they could very well grow out of this affection need that even my son had, but why take the chance? The worst that can happen is they'll gain knowledge, you'll gain insight, you'll get some wisdom and know exactly what you need to do if in fact this goes too far. You can help them to see at whatever stage that they're in that, you know what, life is not about having your needs met all the time. Even if this is not going to be a lifelong problem for them, they still need to know that life is not going to always be there to provide for them what they want. They're going to need to make adjustments in life so that they can receive the things that are due them at the appropriate time. See, children don't know. That's why I'm so excited about this system that's developing. I call it the prodigal system, this whole idea about taking emotions into the circumstances, because nobody is teaching children to do that. The best we can get is you respond a certain way when you're in a certain environment and a certain situation. You do what you are supposed to do when given the right kind of circumstances. So you need to do exactly what you need to do when that requirement of yours is there. So we want you to know then today that the circumstances that you might see that appear to be harmless, that appear to be meaningless, that they could have a further connection somewhere in the future. And so as we begin our tour here at this remote island, First Signs of Trouble, we want to be on the lookout for the first thing that comes to our attention that could be a problem that we overlooked in the past. Let's pause for a minute. Let's think about that. Think about something that may have occurred that you just didn't pay a lot of attention to it. You just thought it was maybe a coincidence. But on second thought, it could have been a signal. It could have been the beginning of some things that we really didn't pay attention to. You know, as we looked at on our last trip, the beginning of the end, you know how we wanted to, not allow the end to end prematurely? Well, we want to make sure that we don't let this end too quickly either. Even though that experience or that event that you're thinking about right now may have been done and it's over, I want you to revisit it. I want you to go back. I want you to think it through. And I want you to see if in fact there may be a connection, and maybe it requires your attention. Now, as I mentioned a little earlier, this trait that Conan had, it didn't go away. And as you've thought through the things that I'm talking about, and you've considered that event that may have taken place sometime in the past that you may have overlooked, but you've revisited that thing now. Now it looks a little different now. Maybe that is the beginning of something. Maybe that is something that I've overlooked. Maybe that is a first sign of trouble that I haven't paid attention to. Well, you want to make sure that you address that, because these traits, they don't take long to develop into habits which ultimately become lifestyles. And so we don't want that to be a part of your experience, because if we catch it in the bud, if we get it early, then you have all that you need to fashion and mold that way of thinking into something positive. Now remember, now when these negative things occur, if you think about what's going on internally, you need to just use it as a signal then, as recognition of the fact that you know God is replacing it. So that replacement is going to bring about the changes that you need, and you're going to be able to handle what needs to be done with a minimal amount of difficulty. Now, like anything else that's new, it takes time to develop it. It takes time to work it through. So we're talking about nothing more now, but just simply looking at things that you have not paid attention to in the past. And just see whether it's a conversation. Now, maybe you don't have children. Maybe it's not a prodigal daughter or prodigal son. Maybe it's a relationship that's become prodigalized, as I like to call it. If it's become that way, and that person has all the tendencies of those who are drifting in the wrong direction, then they're giving you some signals. There's some signs. There are some things that you can draw down on and think about, and you'll recognize that those signs, those first signals, are really the kind of things that you want to talk about. Now, of course, you don't necessarily want to correct anything necessarily immediately, but you want to talk about it. You want to be able to explain in your thinking what it is that's going on and what you would like to see happen as a result. Now, what's the benefit of doing that? The benefit is you're training yourself to work through emotions, and you're doing it with the kind of control that says you can take the emotion in with you. All right, now even a discussion that you're going to have, then I'm encouraging you to take the right emotion in as you go. Now, how do you do that? Well, you consider what it is that your gauge is telling you. You consider where you should be in regards to the emotion that you're going to be experiencing. Now, we'll be looking at this in greater detail later on, but if, you know, with that control panel, if you look at that emotion detector gauge, and if you look at several things on that gauge, but then at certain positions on it, you're going to see different words. Now, on the outer rim of that gauge, you're going to find at 12 o'clock faith, you're going to find at 3 o'clock submission, you're going to find at 6 o'clock forgiveness, and at 9 o'clock you're going to see honesty. Now, if you just think about your emotions in terms of what that system looks like, then you want to start thinking about where you are. If you view that as a clock, what time is it that you need to be concerned about before you have the conversation with that prodigal that you're concerned about? If it happens to be 1 o'clock in the afternoon, well, you know, faith is what you're going to take into the discussion. If it's 6 o'clock in the evening, you're going to have to be forgiving and realize that there's going to be some complications that may come up. If 9 p.m. or following, you're going to have to be honest. Now, note, you can utilize these emotions as you see fit. This is just a guide. It's what I call a quick access guide to give you some kind of a feel for where you need to go and how you need to do what you need to do. So these traits that develop early on are ones that we have to be on the lookout for. So if we're talking about children, if we're talking about growing and developing, we're talking about, you know, immaturity here, we're talking about looking at things from a different perspective until you come away with a better understanding about what it is that you need to do and how you need to function where any relationship is concerned, and in particular and primarily, you know, with your children. Now, you know, I'm going to invite you to go to the workbook. You know, I want you to just look at that workbook, and you're going to pay attention to pages 6, 38, and 35. You're going to look at those 3 pages. You're going to kind of peruse through what they're talking about and realize while you're perusing through that feelings and emotions and controlling them is not easy. They're just not easy. I dare say, before this tour today is over, whether you stop at a gift shop or whether you stop at a restaurant or even getting on and off this plane, you're going to run into some kind of an issue that's going to evoke some type of emotion from you. Could be good, could be bad, but pay attention to it. And you'll begin to understand that emotions come for specific reasons. Most people that get into trouble because of the reaction that they have to emotions. You know that wars are started because of people's emotions? People get upset because one country doesn't do what the other country wants, or one country feels that they got more power than the other country. It's nothing more than childhood experiences all over again, but on a broader scale. So now those who can control their emotions, believe it or not, I believe you can control a world war. If you just stop and say, well, no, it's not worth it, The emotion I want to take is not going to be in agreement with what you're thinking, so I'm going to change it. And the same is true with relationships. Relationships change. They are affected by your emotions. So you need to realize that they can be growing, they can be deteriorating, they can be flourishing, or they can be eroding based on the way you respond emotionally. So think about it. Consider the part that your emotion plays in the position that you're in today. Just think. Most complications that you find yourself in, undoubtedly, were attached to some emotion. Let's take something very safe and simple. Let's say you might be in debt. Let's say you may have just overspent your credit card limit. I dare say that probably you were emotionally involved in whatever purchases you were making. You felt that you needed another one. You felt that you would have to have one. It made you feel good. You thought you wanted to increase your equipment. You needed to have just a bit more of what it was that you already had. So you can see that even an emotional attachment to the way you spend your money can have a great impact on you. So now let's consider that gauge again. Now I know that if I begin to experience the need to just make myself feel good today, you know how it goes. You deserve a break today. You deserve something that you feel that you haven't received today. Well, how about postponing fulfillment of that desire? Now you begin to get a feel for what it's like to control your emotions. Just pause for a minute. You don't need to do what you think you need to do instantly. You can do it later, but let's put a time limit on it. Let's wait a minute and let's see what happens as a result. Now understand clearly. See, when you have it your way, you pursue satisfaction in the way that you feel is right. You do it because of the way you think you want to feel and what you think needs to happen to you. And all I want to say to you is you don't have to do that. I want you to listen carefully to a few things that will be very helpful to you. First of all, the antidote for anger is simply being honest. Being honest. You know what I mean? And thinking again, if we're looking at one emotion now, just one that might be something that you're going to experience before this trip is over. You just need to know that when honesty is engaged, when anger surfaces, you don't simply push it down and react to it. You make it clear. You tell a person that I have to be honest with you, you've upset me. I am angry because of what you've done. See, what we do, we usually react to people. We start doing things. We retaliate. You know, we become sarcastic. We're not honest enough to say, look, you hurt my feelings, and I am angry about that. But I want to make sure that I don't respond to this anger. So how about we just have a discussion over what it is I need to do? Since it's 12 o'clock and I know I need to be operating by faith, I think I'm going to just believe God to enable me to engage in this conversation to such a degree that it'll work in our favor. So keep in mind that emotions that go unexpressed escalate. They don't remain stagnant. They escalate. So it's not healthy to allow your emotions to sit and to seethe, but you need to control them. And I think the control comes from this prodigal system that will enable you to take a proper emotion into an experience and govern the outcome of that experience by the emotion that you bring with you. Now, if that ain't exciting, I don't know what is. I mean, if I got that kind of control, see, you know what kind of confidence that gives? You know what kind of power that offers? You know what? My job search gets easier now. I mean, I understand now that, you know what, your loss is what you're going to jeopardize if you refuse employing me, because I'm the kind of person you want to be on your team. So, ladies and gentlemen, I invite you now to enjoy the benefits of this location that we're in. First signs of trouble, got some very good things going on for it, very exciting things happening. So I want you to peruse around, visit the gift shop, visit the snack bar, do what you can, but keep in mind that unexpressed emotions do not lie dormant. They will make themselves known. How about you introduce an emotion before it decides to make its introduction to you? It's been my pleasure and my privilege to speak to you again. your captain is really enjoying the privilege of being the one that's involved in the very processes that he's talking about. And feel free to ask the question, to talk to a friend, to even make mention of what you've heard today to another, that they might be encouraged to be thinking about how they can gain the same kind of information that you've gained today. Look forward to seeing you the next time, and we'll continue our journey